Despite being financially successful and critically acclaimed, the superbly made prison drama Midnight Express has had its reputation tarnished over the years since its release in 1978. One major problem that has shoved it off the public discourse radar is its harsh presentation of the Turkish people, and the other is its extreme deviations from the real Billy Hayes' story. I haven't read his source book, but I did watch some interviews with him. From what I've read, there was no girlfriend character, and Hayes did have homosexual relationships while in prison, although personally I think the film did a clever job of strongly suggesting that it did happen, while pretending that it didn't to keep audiences on board. After all, homosexuality in movies was far less acceptable to audiences back then. In fact, the film's director, Alan Parker, has stated that it was studio executive pressure that made them tone down the homosexual element. Guards didn't try to rape the real Billy Hayes, as far as I know, and there was no psychotic violent outburst, and the actual prison escape didn't involve Billy putting on a guard uniform. Like many people, my value of the film took a bit of a knock when I learned about these deviations. It felt like Oliver Stone had been rather dishonest in how he'd written the film, and it seemed like he'd done it purely to make the film more commercially viable. It could even be argued that he was trying to make Billy Hayes seem more innocent than he actually was. But despite the massive deviations from the real Billy Hayes' story, in viewings of the film since, I've still found Midnight Express to be an incredibly powerful film. It doesn't feel dishonest, and it doesn't feel shamelessly commercial or contrived. It's internally consistent in its expression. So I started to take an interest in how the film was conceived and written, and in doing so, not only did I recover the appreciation of the film that I had before I knew how historically inaccurate it was, but I now appreciate the film even more on account of two particular themes that I'd never heard of. The first theme that I began to suspect is that in writing the script to be much harsher than the real Billy Hayes' story, Oliver Stone may have been subconsciously expressing his own traumas of serving a tour of duty in the Vietnam War. The first thing that led me to this suspicion was that the finished movies of both Midnight Express and Oliver Stone's Vietnam War movie Platoon 8 years later, they both contained similar dialogue metaphors about characters being caught up in a violent and bureaucratic machine.
We all of us come from a factory, and sometimes the factory makes bad machines that don't work, so they put them here. The bad machines don't know that they're bad machines, but the people at the factory know.
Now, I got no fight with any man that does what he's told. But when he don't, the machine breaks down. And when the machine breaks down, we break down.
As it turns out, Stone had already written the script for Platoon before he wrote Midnight Express. He was unable to get Platoon made at the time, and he probably thought it would never get made, but his script was strong enough that he got hired to write Midnight Express instead. In fact, it was his Vietnam War script that persuaded director Alan Parker to bring him on board. Parker explains that they gave Stone a lot of freedom to write the first draft, and mostly kept out of his way because they didn't really get on too well. And this gave Stone the freedom to really inject his own themes, ideas and emotions into the story. As a result, they were all blown away by the first draft, and any doubts about Stone's ability and any personal differences were shoved aside. Being that Stone had a strong urge to tell his own true story about his Vietnam War experience, it seems inevitable to me that in writing Midnight Express he would at the very least unconsciously end up injecting elements of his own war experience into his adaptation of Billy Hayes' prison experience. After all, something that has been present throughout Oliver Stone's screenwriting career is a desire to lift the blindfolds from the audience's eyes to show us how violent and corrupt our world really is. As is evident in the overlapping bureaucratic machine concepts in both films, Platoon and Midnight Express, it seems clear to me that Stone viewed his tour of duty in Vietnam as being equivalent to a prison sentence. If you watch his film Platoon, that notion is ever more present. Characters complain about wanting their tour of duty to end as soon as possible. Like in a prison, they count off the number of days they have left until they are set free.
I don't think I can keep this up for a year, Grandma.
How long you got left?
332 days.
You gotta, like, count backwards or something, you know, like you got 40 days in.
Both Midnight Express and Platoon place strong emphasis on the physical discomforts of their parallel prison scenarios, walls and bars in one movie, and the endless bars of jungle trees in the other. Both films show men frustrated by their circumstances, turning to rape and violence as a means to vent their anger.
One day, one of the new kids was raped in the children's Kogas.
You homosexual, Tail? What the fuck is your problem, Tail? It's the fucking thing.
Both Billy Hayes and Oliver Stone became trapped in a foreign culture context that would have been somewhat alien to them, with the temptation to attribute the pain of their experience to that culture.
I hate your nation, and I hate your people!
In both films, kids end up being victimised by the frustrated. I think a strong argument can also be made that in Stone's script for Midnight Express, the brutal prison guards are a ghost-like pathological substitute for either the Viet Cong or the higher-ranking US military officers who Stone served under, perhaps even both. There do appear to be some conceptual overlaps between the savagery of Sergeant Barnes in Platoon and the prison warden in Midnight Express, particularly their cruelty to kids. We could even equate the brutal prison setting of Midnight Express with the brutality of Viet Cong concentration camps. However, I'm not aware of Oliver Stone having ever been in a POW camp, so if that parallel is there, I don't think it would have been by conscious intention, unless he put it in there because he'd heard about the concentration camps. Nevertheless, I think the parallel is too strong to be completely ignored. In both contexts, US prisoners are incarcerated, beaten and tortured by an enemy who speak a different language. It's not prominent in Platoon, but it's strongly implied here.
Motherfuckers.
By the way, I came across a very interesting statement from director Alan Parker about a scripted ending that Stone had written and which wasn't used. Note the striking parallel with the battlefields of warfare. Quote, "The last 10 pages of Stone's script had called for a final act which had Billy being chased across poppy fields by tanks and border guards, replete with explosions and machine gun fire near Erdene on the Turkey-Greece border, where he eventually swims across the Maritsa River to freedom. It was very formulaic and curiously at odds with the originality of the rest of the script, and certainly didn't sit comfortably with the film I had shot." End quote. So yeah, I'm placing my bet. I reckon that particular ending was written by Stone with reference to the battlefields of Vietnam. Okay, before we move on to the second hidden theme of the film, I'm going to do a bit of a promotion for my most recent paid content. Recently I posted a 58-minute video called Hidden Dreams, the key to decoding the films of David Lynch and Stanley Kubrick. That video is exclusively available only to my Patreon supporters, so if you want access to that one, you can sign up to become a monthly supporter for a small fee. The link is in the video description. I also have a handful of long-form videos produced in late 2022 that are available on my site for digital download and which you may not have seen. There's a 94-minute video on the high-quality acting and dialogue in John Carpenter's The Thing. There's a similar 86-minute video on the characters and acting in Alien. There's episode 3 of the Collative Archives. That one is exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Also, as digital downloads on my site, there's a 1 hour 50-minute study called Greatest Screen Heroes R2-D2 in the original Star Wars trilogy. There's a 29-page article on how to improve your observational skills, and that one comes with a 1 hour 40-minute audio file. Go to the Insight page on my site for that one. There's a 2-hour video called Story Structure, Plot Logistics and Physicality in James Cameron's Aliens. And there's another video that's just under 2 hours, Greatest Screen Villains, Scorpio and Dirty Harry. Tons of content there while you're waiting for my next free upload. I also have Collative Learning t-shirts, mugs and other merchandise items, and 2 more channels here on YouTube that some of you might not have looked at yet. All those links are in the video description too. Okay, so let's get back to the film analysis. Right, so the next theme that I was personally unaware of in previous viewings of Midnight Express is one that Oliver Stone has openly talked about. In this excellent interview for Filmmaker magazine in 2016, Stone talks about his personal experience of being imprisoned for a mere 2 ounces of grass in San Diego. This was before Midnight Express was written. Stone explains how he saw prisoners, particularly blacks and Latinos, not having access to legal representation and therefore being at the mercy of the system, at the mercy of the courts. He also talks about getting his father to bring an expensive lawyer in to help him get out of jail. And this is undoubtedly paralleled in the excellent scenes of Billy Hayes being visited by his father in Midnight Express.
I've been writing insurance policies for 30 goddamn years and now I gotta see my own son.
Stone explains that in writing the script he was making a story about authoritarian prison systems the world over, and was merely using the Billy Hayes case as a vehicle for that. He even equates the harsh presentation of the Turkish prison guards as symbolising the prison system in the US, which ironically goes against the racist message that the film has been alleged to have. At the same time, he refused to apologise for the depiction of Turkish prisons in the film because the penal system in Turkey was abusive and condemned by international human rights groups. And he isn't making that up. A quick search engine input returns multiple examples still going on today. Director Alan Parker has also explained that in preparation for the shoot he actually visited the Turkish film where the real Billy Hayes had been prisoner. Parker also explains that he visited a Turkish prison for the mentally ill, basing much of the depiction in the film upon that. So in my view, if Turkey wants to counter the bad prison reputation that the film has given it, then instead of blaming this film they should actually reform their prison systems. But it's now been about 45 years since Midnight Express was released. Too little too late. Okay, so we have two major themes hiding beneath the deceptive, true story of Billy Hayes framing of the film. Oliver Stone's expression of his Vietnam War traumas, as well as his frustrations stemming from personal experiences within the US prison system and his resulting rage against prison systems the world over. The latter theme has been expressed by director Alan Parker as a shared motivation on his part. Now, from all this comes an awkward philosophical dilemma in how we assess Midnight Express. If Stone did in fact consciously or unconsciously fuse conceptual elements of his real-life Vietnam War and US prison system experiences into the story of Billy Hayes' Turkish prison experience, is this a disservice to the viewer? Is it a disservice to the real Billy Hayes? And is it a disservice to the Turkish people, being that they were presented so harshly in the film? Or at least their prison guards were presented harshly. Personally, I find it quite easy to approve of the surrealistic fusion of Billy Hayes and Oliver Stone's traumatic experiences into one story, which in turn renders that story ironically as a work of fiction. I think if the film had completely stuck to the facts and claims made by Billy Hayes himself, then the movie wouldn't be as dramatically powerful, and I don't think it would have connected so strongly with audiences. I also think the fusing of Stone's and Hayes' prison experiences with the subtle Vietnam War frustration overlap results in a movie that feels much more universally symbolic rather than just being one particular man's story. And that universality makes the film highly relatable, as well as giving good rewatch value. I mean, I've never met one person who has seen this film and said they weren't moved by it or didn't like it. Seeing the film for the first time as a kid, I was conceptually struck by these dialogue lines.
What's legal today is suddenly illegal tomorrow because some society says it's so. And what's illegal yesterday is suddenly legal because everybody's doing it. And you can't put everybody in jail.
That little bit of very simple insight into the complex minefield of legal systems has stuck with me for my entire life. It forever altered my perception of the law. That's how good the writing is. Oliver Stone wrote that concept in a way that even a prepubescent kid can fully relate to and integrate into the worldview. That's powerful. However, it's easy for me to express agreement with this particular film taking massive liberties in terms of historical accuracy. I approve the artistic liberties taken because I personally happen to agree with most of the film's core messages about some people being imprisoned unfairly and their lives being ruined for minor crimes, sometimes which shouldn't even be classed as crimes at all. And this isn't to say that the film is pushing for the total abolishment of the penal system. I mean, it includes one character who really should be kept off the streets if he's guilty of what he was accused of.
They say I raped a little child. I've been here a very, very long time, and they'll never let me go.
But on the other hand, when I see movies that alter recorded history in order to push themes that I personally disagree with, and especially if I think the filmmakers are deliberately trying to deceive audiences, then I tend to find myself strongly disapproving of such deviations. That's arguably a judgmental bias on my part, but even being aware of that bias doesn't alter my respect for Midnight Express at all. It's a contradiction in my perception of the film that, until very recently, I was kind of uncomfortable with. So I had a bit more of a think about this and eventually came to a conclusion that I'm now happy with. I know I wouldn't want the film to be changed because I think there's too much universal truth and cinematic power in it as it is. There's great value in that, and I think those messages are more important than just telling the real Billy Hayes' personal one-man story. After all, the real Billy Hayes' book is still available to anyone who wants to explore that historical route. And Oliver Stone has described that when writing the script, he didn't even know that the real Billy Hayes had made multiple drug smuggling trips across the Turkish border. So who's to say how accurate and honest Billy's own book about his experience is? Instead, I think what would have more effectively fended off criticism for the movie version of Midnight Express would be if, instead of having a caption at the beginning that reads, "The following is based on a true story," I think that caption should have read something like, "This film is loosely based upon the prison experience of Billy Hayes. Some elements have been altered or added for dramatic power and to highlight worldwide penal system abuses of human rights." A basic alteration of the opening caption along these lines would be absolutely fine with me. Alternately, the film could have just been framed as a completely fictional story from the outset, but that wouldn't be very honest either, and that framing would probably reduce its power. It would make audiences just pass it all off as just a movie, instead of making them sit back and think deeply about the untold millions of people around the world, past and present, who have suffered prison abuses as bad or even worse than what we see in this film. Everyone knows that the Shawshank Redemption movie is a fictional prison story, and that film has had its own powerful impact on the public psyche, but the film never made me stop and think about real-world prison system abuses in the way Midnight Express does, simply because I know the Shawshank Redemption is fiction. So yeah, I think an altered opening caption along these lines would have struck the right balance. Isn't it funny how the mere alteration of a single sentence can make such a fundamental shift in perception? Thanks for watching, folks. You've been listening to Rob Ager of CollativeLearning.com. Don't forget about those other new videos I mentioned. Some of them can be accessed via Patreon if you sign up. Others can be ordered as digital downloads on my website. To make sure you receive more reliable updates about my future videos, sign up to me on Twitter and on my Collative Learning Facebook page. The links are in the video description below. Until next time, stay free.